what do you believe defines a good death?
Well, it almost sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, doesn't it? Like, how could death possibly be good? But I believe that there are a few things that do make for a good death. One is that medically there's no distress or limited distress. A lot of people believe that death is awful and traumatizing, and it really doesn't have to be like that. Medically, we can make death, very, very comfortable. But the second piece is spiritually. And I think that for many of us, we don't have a good relationship with death. We're not comfortable with our own death. And I understand that. I want to be here for as long as humanly possible too. But I think if we can set a place for death at the table and just not feed it, but always acknowledge that it is a possibility, whether we're 5 or 105, whether we're unwell or well, then we can start to sort of make peace with this thing that is coming for us. And I think that if we can lock those two things down, that can make for a good death.
So who are you and what are we doing here today?
I'm Casey Beros, and you're listening to the Retire Right podcast.
This is a podcast that will help you plan and execute one of the biggest moments in your life. That's retirement. You'll learn how to set up your finances in a way that benefits you, your lifestyle goals, and keeps you in the know within this complex world of money and investing. Your host is Glen James, former financial advisor, author, and host of the popular Money, Money, Money podcast. Glen is joined by experts in various fields around the topic of retirement in Australia. Any advice in this podcast is of a general nature. Full details are in the show notes of this episode. You only retire once, so retire right.
Casey, welcome to the show. It's great that you're here with us in Perth. If you are watching on YouTube, we're in a suite about 22 stories up.
It's very fancy.
It is, the Western, shout out. Hey, how did you come to write your book Next of Kin, your latest book, and basically talk about death and get in this world? Like, what's the background to Casey and the journey up to this book?
Well, I've been a health journalist for the last 20 years, almost 20 years. And I guess you'll remember, because you look like you're a similar vintage to me, when we were growing up, there wasn't a million podcasts, all of these social media accounts. We would be going through our own hard things, listening to our CDs in our bedrooms by ourselves, unless we went to the library or a bookstore and borrowed a book or bought a book. There wasn't these communities that existed online that would allow us to feel like we weren't alone in whatever it was that we were going through. And fast forward to now, and there's obviously millions of podcasts and books and these resources online and social media at our fingertips to help us go through any hard thing. And yet, when I got the call from my dad saying that he had been diagnosed with a terminal rapidly progressing cancer and had 6 to 12 months to live, I felt like there was nothing. And it was so strange to me because—
How old was Dad when he had the diagnosis?
66.
Wow.
And it was really odd to me because I'd had 2 children by that point, and lots of people who've had children or who knows people who've had children will be familiar with the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. People fall pregnant, they run out, they get the book, they read it, they put it on the shelf and they let it gather dust while they then start to become a parent, pick it up again when they need to. And I thought that's so fascinating to me that when there's new life, when there's a new child, new baby, there is content to walk us through every crying, screaming, breathing, snotting moment of becoming a parent and being a parent. And yet when you get towards the end of life, or somebody that you love gets towards the end of life, and that could be from disease or have a disability or indeed be dying, there is just nothing. It felt like there were crickets. And I thought, I've always captured my experiences. Dad and I were very analytical people, so we were forever, really dissecting his experience of the healthcare system, the aged care system, and, what would eventually be the death care system for him. And I thought, we have to share this. It's not fair that people would go through the hardest time of their life and it just felt to me like there was nothing. There was clinical textbooks and a few memoirs, and that was it. And so I thought I have to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and I guess we're not getting out of here alive, and that's a fact. And And that's why I wanted to really chat with you, because it's funny. I love what you said. We all prepare for like when we're expecting, if someone falls pregnant, they might go, all right, crap, we've got to get ready because we're now expecting. We're all going to die. And it's such a weird thing to just talk about. And I think the West, we haven't done death well, and it's awkward almost.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of head in the sand. And I think that probably adds to the anxiety around it. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken to about this book, and they'll say things to me like, oh, I'm not going through the thing, so I don't really need the book right now, but I might need it in the future. And I'll often think to myself, would I have picked it up before I was going through what I was going through with Dad? The answer is probably not. Do I wish that I had those learnings on board when I was kind of thrust into this role of being his primary carer? Yeah, I really do. Like, I really believe it would have made my life so much easier had I known a few of the things that are in that book, because it is so complicated and so confusing at a time when you're also feeling very emotional, and that does not make for an easy experience.
The grieving actually starts when the diagnosis is given, right?
I believe so. And it certainly depends on the diagnosis, but definitely in a terminal illness setting, that's anticipatory grief, that you kind of see this wall of pain coming towards you. And to be really honest, towards the end of our experience, I was almost like, okay, universe, just rip the Band-Aid off, because I can't keep saying goodbye for this long. I can't keep watching him struggle and suffer for this long.
It's that because he was, what's the term, compos mentis, like with it, quote unquote.
Yep.
It's almost just left to a dementia diagnosis, isn't it?
What do you mean?
In terms of it's this drawn out process, and if, a lot of people, when, we've all experienced people with dementia, it's agonizing and a painful experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I would say that so he was given 6 to 12 months. He lived for 2.5 years, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And I would say that the first, 2 years of that, I mean, they weren't a picnic, but he was pretty good. He went away with us 3 months before he passed away. And, so he was pretty good. He was out playing pool, playing pool, and at my little brother's, graduation thing, from high school, a month, 3 weeks before he passed away. So look, the end was pretty rough for him and for all of us, but for the most part, it was pretty good. And that's where like everybody's journey is so unique with this experience. You
talked about you being the primary carer. What did that look like for you in terms of your own career and life disruption? Were there not other options within the family? And it's just very interesting because my parents live in Brisbane. My sister lives on the Gold Coast. I'm like, if something happens to mum and dad, I'm sorry, but you're kind of it because you're the closest. I don't know. It's a very odd thing that we're all going to have to go through.
Yes. And I think it's really wise to start considering those things now. Like, where do you have siblings? Where do they live geographically? What are their strengths and skills? So, for example, if someone is a lawyer or an accountant or somebody's a nurse or a very, giving teacher, like you might already be able to look, and people are probably thinking about their siblings as they're hearing this. You might be able to think about your siblings and like, where would their strengths lie? Some people are great in a crisis. Some people totally lose their minds. Some people are excellent with admin and finance, and other people are like couldn't organize, a form to get from one place to the other if their life depended on it.
Yeah.
So thinking about what your strengths are, where you live, and this is really common and quite unique to Australia in some ways, just because we are so big. And so many of us will move away from where we've grown up, build a life somewhere else like I did. I moved from Perth to Sydney. I lived there for 15 years. I never thought that I would come back. And then you get that phone call that completely turns your life upside down. And so to answer your question, I never thought, oh, I'm going to become Dad's primary carer. I just kind of found myself in that role. We got the call, we got on a plane, we came back to Perth. It was June 2021, so COVID was running rampant, borders were closing left, right and centre. And we came back to kind of walk him through a few appointments and just get the lay of the land. And then I suppose I thought that me and my two daughters would stay. My husband might go back and forth, but because the borders to WA were shut, we couldn't do that. Yeah. And so we had sort of inadvertently moved back to Perth. And the answer to your question, were there others, is yes, but were at very different times of their life. So I have an older sister who lives in America, and I have three much younger siblings who were understandably living their lives, their young lives. And so I don't know whether it felt like
Did
duty.
Dad have a partner at the time of diagnosis?
No. And then somebody sort of came back into his life sort of as a result of that diagnosis. And then that partnership was sort of on and off throughout the rest of his life, which was beautiful sometimes and really hard other times for him and for everybody else. And so this stuff's really complicated and unique, right? Like you might not, somebody might have been with their long-term partner. That changes things completely. Technically, they would be their next of kin. Then there's, there's all different sorts of setups when it comes to siblings and children, and everybody has their own relationships with their parents, and one might be great and one might be strained, and other people have different bandwidth for what they can deliver. So for example, somebody might have children with special needs that take up a huge amount of their capacity and bandwidth, and others may have chosen not to have children, so have had have more bandwidth. But I always say to people, and this is the thing that I want people to take away who are listening, is care is never equal. I am yet to have a conversation with a family who says to me, oh my God, we looked after Mum for 7 years and it was so even. We all chipped in the exact same amount, financially, physically, mentally, socially, emotionally, spiritually. And we came through it thick as thieves, and there's no resentment and everyone's great. I am yet to have that conversation. And it just proves that, care can be a really ripe breeding ground for resentment. But I do also believe that it can be really fertile ground for fertile ground, not futile ground, fertile ground for connection. And that you actually can come through it stronger, but through it is the operating word there.
Is the nature of your dad's cancer in the public domain in the book, or have you just left it as cancer?
It is. No, he had mesothelioma, which is cancer from exposure to asbestos.
Jeez, gosh. And obviously from a career or
No.
digging up, renovating an old shack or something, or?
No, he went to a asbestos mine site.
Gosh.
Which shall remain nameless, on school camp when he was 15 years old. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that was his only exposure. And the reason that we know that is because in Western Australia where we live, we have a globally the highest rate of mesothelioma here. Because we used to mine it here. And so we have a sort of compensation trigger that happens when somebody is diagnosed that they analyse where they were exposed.
And so not the purpose of this podcast, but was there other compensation that come out of your dad's case?
Yes, he got some compensation.
Yeah.
Of course, nowhere near the value of his life or even his suffering. But what I think is really interesting for this podcast and for this audience is my dad had never had any money. He had never built a career that was based on financial gain. He'd done some really powerful, impactful things. He was the head of the Save Ningaloo campaign. Ningaloo Reef is a huge stretch of reef, a beautiful stretch of reef up in the north of Western Australia, off a place called Exmouth.
Yep.
And it's
that's still in the news, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So this is many, many years ago now, but he was, basically headed up that campaign with a handful of very high-profile Australians who, helped prevent this marina from being built, which would have effectively turned it into the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah.
And so he managed to protect that. He had 5 beautiful children, all who love him dearly, and did some incredible work in the men's wellbeing space here in Western Australia. So he achieved some great things, but he never climbed the corporate ladder. He never owned property.
So he was a renter?
Yes,
Yeah.
he was a renter. And I remember when I first got back to Perth, and he was living in this 1-bedroom flat in quite a nice area actually, but definitely the worst set of flats that you could find in that area or any of the surrounding areas, as cheap as he could find. And I remember cleaning the apartment and, it was riddled with cockroaches and I thought, it's a 1-bedroom apartment, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. And I thought, God, if he's going to get really sick, we can't do this here. We need to get him out of here. And so I would say that the small amount of compensation that he was given gave him a couple of things. And that was some comfort, meaning we were able to move him out of that apartment into a cleaner, nicer 2-bedroom apartment where I could go and stay, and I'd stay, 3-4 nights a week. My siblings could go and stay. My nan could go and stay. We had a little bit more room to breathe. He could take us all out for dinner and not worry about how he was going to pay the bill.
Yeah.
He took us all up to Ningaloo to check out
yeah.
what he was able to protect. He'd never really been in a position to be able to do
So
those things.
it just provided a bit of dignity in the end years.
Yes,
Yeah.
it definitely did.
Yeah.
And I know it gave him great comfort knowing that, he probably never would have acquired any wealth and been able to leave anything to his children. And he was able to do that, and it wasn't a life-changing amount for any of us. But it was most certainly enough to give us a real head start, particularly for my younger siblings who are much earlier in their wealth building journey. If they do smart things with it, which I know that they will, that's absolutely a free kick. And I know that gave him great comfort and that he was quite proud actually that he was able to leave something for them.
Amazing. So what I want to do, I want to maybe ask you some more questions on the timelines and your care involvement, continuing this personal story, and then we might go into some practical things that people need to consider. And I probably would say, while if you are listening and you might not be the same age as Casey and your parents might not be the same age as Casey's dad, I would imagine the concepts might still apply if you're 60 and you've got aging parents in their 80s. Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So at the time of diagnosis, obviously a big shock for the family. And would you say like within the week of diagnosis, they were like, this is terminal, or did it take a couple of months to say those words?
It's a tricky diagnosis. I mean, lots of cancers are, to be honest. You kind of find some kind of trigger, some impetus to test. With something like mesothelioma, you then need to, for example, Dad had 6 litres of fluid on his left lung that had to be drained, and then that fluid needed to be tested to absolutely confirm the diagnosis.
Yep.
And then there are specific types depending on the sort of cells that it's affecting most. And then you need to check to make sure that it's not anywhere else in the body. And so it is a sort of lengthy process. I believe Dad came to me about 10 days into the process. So
Right.
He really went into hospital, got that fluid drained. He had the diagnosis of mesothelioma before he came to me and had only shared the diagnosis with, I think, 1 or 2 others to
Right.
support him in the lead up. And that in itself, I think he was trying. My first book had just came out. I was sort of riding high. We were in a really exciting time of our lives over in Sydney. And my husband had just graduated from his master's degree. I had 2 beautiful little girls. So I think in some ways Dad was trying to protect me and gather as much data as he possibly could before he brought that news to me.
And your first book, and I've actually seen the title, The Bad Girl's Guide to Better. Wow. Actually, we should have you on our other show and talk about that book because I think that's a lot of fun.
I'd love to. There's a whole money chapter.
Love it.
Yeah.
I think that's where I know you from, the Sydney media scene.
Yes.
I think that's where I've seen your name, and
Gotcha.
It's all coming back now. Okay, so Dad was diagnosed. Between the diagnosis, and it's kind of this weird thing, it's like the condition was probably there for many years, and then it comes to a critical mass where it starts to impact life. So if there was how long was Dad maybe bedridden and couldn't actually do any of the activities of daily living stuff?
Good question. And this is where our memories fail us, right?
Yes.
So I would say that for probably the last month, walking had started to become quite difficult.
Okay.
His feet were quite swollen with fluid. And I remember specifically his feet were so swollen that he couldn't wear shoes or slippers.
Wow.
And we had 2 weeks in hospice to get his symptoms under control. And I will never forget, he had what they call terminal restlessness or terminal agitation. And it can look a bit different for different people, but for most it is either trying to get up out of bed. They can try to get up and run away, or they can be speaking in sort of riddles. For my dad, it was this just constant movement. So couldn't fall asleep. I would watch him fall asleep.
And this really started to present a month out?
About a month. Yep. Yeah, about a month out. I would watch him fall asleep, anytime, day, night, didn't matter. And then it was like he would, and apologies for people who can't see me, but he would kind of wake himself up as though if he fell asleep, he might be sort of snatched in his sleep.
Yeah.
So he was almost fearful of sleep, and we would just walk from sun up till long after the sun had gone down. I looked fantastic, as you can imagine. We just did not stop moving.
Is that a symptom of the disease or a reaction to the medication?
A symptom of the disease.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it just really gets into your neuro system or…
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, we had a death doula, and she explained it to me as it's the sort of last bit of life force energy. We don't want to die.
Yeah.
Whether or not spiritually we're ready or we have acceptance, the body doesn't want to die. It wants to keep living for as long as it possibly can. And so that's how she explained it to me, and that's very much what it looked like.
Yeah.
And so, watching him go through that was really difficult. Watching him so we had 2 weeks in hospice, then 2 weeks at home before he passed away. And those 2 weeks at home were pretty rough. He was attached to an oxygen machine. He had a walker, and then eventually was in a wheelchair, and getting him comfortable, getting him into the bed zone took everything that I had to give. We had silver chain nurses at our house every 3 hours for probably the last 4 days, giving him more and more and more medication, terminal sedation, palliation, that they would give him to try to get him from walking around the apartment, looking in the cupboards, trying to get out of the house, to laying comfortably in bed to allow his body to do what he needed to do. And that was pretty tough.
So call it 2 years of Dad's being diagnosed, we've moved Dad into an apartment, we knew the end was coming. There was probably a lot of, factual or black and white housekeeping, putting affairs in order.
Yes.
Which is awesome. And so I just want to touch on maybe, in the interest of time, I'm going to put a link to your book in the podcast and YouTube show notes. This episode was scheduled to go up on the 25th of December. I'm actually going to bring it up and get the peeps to put it up sooner at the start of December, just so, because I think it's going to be a good Christmas present for
definitely.
friends and family.
Yes.
So we might just, for the purpose of time, skip over some of the practical, get a will, practical power of attorney, practical enduring guardian and all that stuff. But you touched on something and I'm going to ask you about it right after this.
If you're after personal financial advice, don't get it from a podcast. If you would like help based on your own personal situation, head over to retireright.com.au, click Get Help, and we'd be happy to introduce you to one of our trusted professionals. Our panel of vetted financial advisors and mortgage brokers work with people all over Australia, so they can connect with you wherever you are. That's retireright.com.au and click Get Help.
Okay, we're back. When you are in a position where someone has been diagnosed with a terminal illness, had a bad accident that might trigger the end, looking in that the stuff here that's not happening and needs to happen, and maybe the person, she'll be right, I don't need to go to the bloody doctor or whatever that is. I guess in the book, because I do want to ask you about the death doula, because that's a new world for a lot of people and maybe euthanasia stuff. How do you approach this? Come on, this is reality. We need to sort this out.
Well, this is really tricky. And there are two schools of thought here. One is it's their rodeo and you're just there to walk beside them.
Yeah.
Right? So if they don't want to do their will, or if they don't want to go to the doctor, or if they don't want to set a date, or if they don't, whatever, in one part of me truly believes that this is their life. It will be their death and they can do it however they want to. The other part of that is that we are asking, and they may not be directly asking, but essentially as a society, we are asking their family, their next of kin, to step up and ride beside them.
Yes.
And therefore, they should have some advocacy and they should have some say, not in a coercive or a controlling way, but if we're asking families, which we are asking families to do the care because our system is not set up to do it any other way, then they do have to.
They've got a seat at the table.
They do. They absolutely do. And so these conversations, whether they're legal, financial, or whether they're about, the nuts and bolts of care or about death or whatever it might be, they are really hard conversations to have. Not all families talk openly about all things.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many conversations I have with people who say, we don't talk about death in my family, or we don't talk about money in my family, we think it's rude. And all I can say to that is that the more clarity you have on where everything is, how to action on their wishes once they are gone, and what kind of end they would most like, the easier navigating those things becomes. And so I say hard hat for hard chat. And what that means is when we go into a building site, a demolition site, we're asked to put on a hard hat. And we're asked to do that because if a brick happens to fall out of the sky and it happens to land on our head, the hat won't prevent the brick from falling, but hopefully it will prevent the brick from doing damage when it lands on our head. And so hard hat for hard chat means these conversations are not comfortable, they are not easy, but they are there to protect you from for the future.
Yeah.
And they're so vital. And look.
But there is a point here where, this is not to the degree, right, that we're talking about, but I've seen someone in my outer circles, friends, families, wanting to make a financial decision that looking as like, that's a train wreck. I, in good conscience, can't, if I'm involved in their world, sit back and go, oh yeah, it's your money, do what you want. I'm going to tell you, I don't believe this is right for you for these reasons. I've said my piece. Now, I don't know if that's more selfish on me so I can sleep at night, but if it protects them from doing it, I'm so glad I've done that. Or if they do it and it fails, I'm not living in regret going, I wish I said something.
Yes. I think that's actually really, really empowering for people to hear, with the caveat that, if we're talking financially, you've got a financial background, right? So you've got some lived experience there, some expertise that is really genuinely valuable. Where this gets really interesting, and I know you were at my session at South by Southwest, and you might have heard us talk about this term, inheritance impatience.
Yes.
And, that is essentially where we put in an enduring power of attorney or a power of attorney, as aging parents might put one of their children in. And essentially what it means is those children using those assets for their own financial gain way ahead of time, and as the name would suggest, getting a little bit impatient for their inheritance. And the law gets grey here, right? Because technically they have been put into a position of power. They could argue that they are absolutely making the right decision for their parent. It just also happens to have benefit to them, and that's where things get really complicated. And so I think you're wise. I think that's exactly the right thing to do, to say. I guess where we need to probably disconnect a little bit is from any ownership on that. It doesn't sound to me like you're advising them because you want to maximize what's coming to you. It sounds to me like you would be advising them because
I'm trying to protect them, and I want the best to happen for them.
Exactly. So that's actually a really beautiful sentiment. So hard hat for hard chat, here would be my tips. Number one, you plan it, you don't thrust it on them. So regardless. No surprises. I'm yet to find a segue that goes from, can you pass the pepper, to let's talk about what happens when you die.
Yeah.
So plan it. Say, hey, I really want to have a conversation with you about insert thing here. Can we please make a time to do that? And it needs to be a time that works for both of you. It's not at the end of a work day where you're both tired. There's not small children around who are going to demand your attention. You need to think about where. Is home best? Does it need to be neutral ground? Would a cafe be better? Would that be too noisy? So actually have a think about it and give them some time to prepare. Tell them what the intention is. So my intention is to square away ABC, so that in the future, when inevitably the end comes for me, for you, for whoever it is in a box with a bow wrapped around it, and it makes it much easier for you to access when I am gone, so that they can see the intention is right.
The value, you don't have to do this after the terminal diagnosis, after mum needs to go to care.
Mm-hmm.
This can happen in real time now.
Yes.
Before worst case happens, before you get hit by the bus.
Yes.
All that stuff.
That's right. And it's funny because, I often think to myself, have I really communicated to people what I would want, whether or not I would want to be buried or cremated? Would I want a funeral, or would I want a party, or what would I want? Have I communicated that?
I'm a freak. I did my will and my estate planning, and my friend Tim, he's the executor of my estate, and enduring power of attorney first and foremost, then he'll step down to my family. All the advanced care directive and medical decisions my family do, Tim does the black and white.
So good.
I emailed all of them, said, hey everyone, my will's at Aubrey Brown at Tuggerah. Here's what's going to happen. If you got any questions, I suggest you ask me now.
That's so smart and
it
so
felt
proactive.
Awkward, but
yeah, but then it was over.
Yeah.
Right? So it felt awkward for a second, and these conversations are awkward, and then they're done.
Yeah.
And everybody is better off for them. Like, I think that's really powerful. And you touched on something really important, which is that, we don't have to, you can have one enduring power of attorney for your administrative and financial affairs. You can have an enduring medical power of attorney or an enduring guardian, depending on where you live.
What state,
who can make your medical and quality of life decisions. And to take that one step further, you can also spell out how you would like those two people to work together. So you can say, Tom, I want you to be enduring power of attorney, financial administrative with you. Sarah, your enduring medical power of attorney. If you cannot agree, then Ricky will act as a mediator.
Yeah.
You can be really explicit because, and I would say this also for executor. Now, if you had have asked me before I became an executor, who somebody should choose, I would say, just choose the person closest to you. Like I would just choose my husband, or you might choose, I don't know, your child or whatever, if they're an adult. Now, having been one for my father, and Dad had a very straightforward estate, not much to divide, no property to sell, like really straightforward. And it took me the better part of a year amidst my grief.
Did you have an estate planning lawyer do the heavy lifting, or did you DIY it?
DIY.
Yeah. See, I tell people, like, if you're going to be an executor, all good. And if there's some meat in the estate, just pay a lawyer to walk you through it.
Yes.
Like, they're not going to make, like, executors are bound by law to make the right decision and et cetera.
Yes.
But it doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. If there is multiple properties and assets, you would just pay for that lawyer out of the funds of the estate.
Yes, yes.
Now, the hard hat for hard chats, I don't know if we got derailed. Were there any other main points you want to cover there before we talk about the doula?
Yeah, I think coming together. So when you do come together, you've set this time and you do come together, I think just acknowledging that these are uncomfortable conversations and you watch everybody's shoulders drop because they've all come into this feeling a bit sort of tightly wound. And so just simply acknowledging that these are difficult conversations, again, resetting the intention. The reason that we're here, the reason that we're doing this is to make so-and-so's life easier in the future. I don't want there to ever be any fighting because, money is a tangible metric for what feel like very big themes. Love, power, duty, remorse, regret. Like, these are really big themes within families, and unfortunately, money is kind of the only tangible metric that we have with which to measure our value within a family, and that can feel really icky, like really, really icky. And so I think just acknowledging that those conversations are difficult, resetting that intention, and then, just knowing, imagine what life is going to feel like on the other side of that. And all of that said, if those conversations don't land, if they don't go well, if people won't go there, then again, it's their rodeo, and all you can do, you've shown up with as much integrity as you can muster to try to get them to make a smarter decision for their financial future and for what is left behind. And that's all that you can do. You can lead a horse to water.
They do say that. Okay, so I want to talk about the death doula and potentially whether voluntary assisted dying was on the table here. I don't know. Does Perth allow it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think everyone does now.
Yeah, except for Northern Territory.
Northern Territory. And actually the co-panelist that you had at South by, Vicky.
Shoshana or Zenith?
Zenith. I want to get Zenith on the show.
Yeah, you should.
I might get you to do an intro.
Absolutely.
I just love what
she's brilliant.
She said, like, if you're against voluntary assisted dying, you don't have to do it. I'm like, yes. Hey, so we'll talk about that. But before that, a really practical thing that stood out to me, it seems like your family got to the point where you were seated in reality that Dad has a terminal condition. Talk to us about how that played out in terms of a living funeral and how long was that before he was kind of in that month of, I guess, final decay?
Yes.
I don't know how to put that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, my memory might fail me.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess it was about 6 weeks before he passed away.
Wow.
And he had flirted with the idea of having a living wake.
A living wake, not a living funeral.
A living wake,
Right.
yes. So living wake meaning when, the person who's doing the dying is in attendance and you can invite whoever you want and you can kind of say the things to them that you want to say. And so he had kind of flirted with the idea and then he'd gone off the idea and then at some point he sort of circled back to it. And so he had decided he didn't want a funeral, he wanted a party, and that party was going to be called the after party.
Yeah, great.
And so this party was called the party before the after party, and Dad was in attendance, and we had 30 of his nearest and dearest come to my house, and everybody brought something to contribute to a potluck dinner.
But also really good strategically for your sibling in the States.
Yes, she chose not to come home.
Right.
She came home kind of early in the diagnosis,
Right.
and had a month or so in Australia, and we all went up to Ningaloo, and
But you had the time together
we
anyway.
had time
Yeah.
together, and my dad had gone over and spent a month in the States,
Oh,
and they
cool.
had a road trip together. She just decided at the end, and I can't speak on her behalf, but, I think she just decided at the end that the time that she'd had with him was the time, that's sort of how she wanted to remember, which I understand. And so the party before the after party, we had 30 of his nearest and dearest at my house. We had a potluck dinner. We had his cardboard eco-friendly coffin there. And before everybody had come over, he had said to me, his name was Jack, and he had said to me, what would be really cool is if on the top of my coffin it said Jack in the box. And then down the bottom it could say return to sender. He thought that would be really cool and really funny. So I had gotten this friend of mine who was a sign maker to do this incredible design, and then everybody else came over and put handprints and glitter and shells and photos and little poems and really decorated the rest of it. And it was such a beautiful example of the fact that, we don't just have to follow this kind of well-trodden, stuffy path that goes from death to funeral in a funeral parlor. We really can do it however we want to, and in a way that suits that person. Like, I couldn't even imagine my dad going to a funeral, let alone
But this whole thing,
having one.
To me, it just screams we're seated in reality. This is happening whether we want it or not. Like, we are here now.
Yes.
Let's acknowledge it, as awkward as it is, and at least try and control one part of the situation, right?
Yes, I think that's right. And I do think it gave him some comfort. I don't know. I can't say that he was truly in acceptance. That's not what it seemed like from the outside. It seemed like he was still really grappling with it spiritually, because I think, he felt ripped off, and I get that because I felt ripped
it's just
off too.
young. Like,
Yeah,
in
it's
this
too young.
day and age, 93 or something
Yes.
is life expectancy.
That's right. And he was 68 when he passed, and he was a very young 68. And he did feel ripped off, and he would be the first person to tell you that the illness had delivered richness to his life that he would not return. He had this really funny relationship with the diagnosis in the end, because he was like, it has delivered so much richness to my life.
Would he have done the family trip to Ningaloo?
No.
Would he have done the road trip in the States?
No, never. We
Yeah.
would never have done those things. He would never have had the money to be able to do those things. I wouldn't have come home. We wouldn't have had all this beautiful time together. So I remember him saying to me, it's not that I wouldn't give the diagnosis back, but I'm in a way so grateful. And like, what an amazing place to land. And that's not to say that he inhabited that space all the time. He certainly grappled at other times, but yeah, he was, I know he was grateful, but still kind of struggling spiritually. So that event was able to, show him exactly how loved he was and feel community around him.
Everyone, I don't know if it was the living wake or if there was a formal wake after passing, but everyone got a piece of Dad. Talk to us about that.
Yes, that was the formal wake, which we called the after party.
The after party.
It wasn't very formal. It was at a bowls club.
Of course it was.
Of course. And, we didn't have a minister or any of that. We had a colleague of his, an Indigenous colleague of his, come and play the yidaki, the didgeridoo, and welcome us all to country. We sat in circle and shared stories about Dad. We had sausages on the barbecue, and we all had a few drinks, and we had set up, so Dad lived in a rental, as I had mentioned, and one of the jobs that I had to do kind of in the immediate aftermath of him passing was pack up his apartment, clean it, return it to the rental agent, because I didn't want to keep paying rent out of his estate. And so, everybody chipped in, and we spent, probably 2 weeks getting it done. It took forever. It's amazing how much stuff somebody can accumulate in a lifetime. But there was, we had never had like a family home, for example. So there was no there was no squabbling over, oh, I want that vase or I want that chair or whatever. So we each took a couple of things that meant something to us. And then there was this huge volume of stuff that didn't really mean anything to us. Like I might not need another whisk or set of tongs, but I don't just want to give it away.
Yeah.
And so we took everything to the after party, to the wake, and spread it all out like we had a dad market, and we put it on long trestle tables, and there was everything from his clothing to his shoes to his books to his knickknacks, anything that was still kind of useful and valuable in some way was laid out. And we invited everybody to take home a piece of dad, and every single piece got taken. I can't tell you how much joy it gives me to know that like dad's whisk is sitting in somebody's kitchen drawer right now. And it's like, that's evidence of his life being lived. I love it.
That is awesome. Now, final question. Do you want to do your phone
Yeah, let me see if it will let me.
And just while Casey is trying to add her parking on before we get to the final question, if you are watching on YouTube, Casey has gifted me a copy of her book with a photo of her and Dad, and we'll put that up on the screen so you can see that. What was there a significance? Like you wrap this book with a nice bow and also this beautiful feather. Is there a significance to this other than it's nice?
Oh, I just do it because I just believe in like little signs. I don't know if anybody else believes in little signs, but I most certainly do.
Yeah.
And, I'm forever looking for little signs from Dad.
Yeah.
And so I just did it as a little keepsake.
Yeah, love it. So, okay, last 5 minutes because we both have to bounce.
Yes.
Everyone remember, grab this book, Next of Kin. I mean, what a Christmas present.
It is such a gift.
Like,
it really is.
Just to start a conversation. So, yeah, I'll make sure we get this episode up sooner than what was planned.
And I just want to say as well that in that, there are things in this book, like it may make you cry, but it will also make you really laugh. That not everything is terribly serious. I've tried to help people lose themselves in the narrative of the story, and, there are things in there like, here's how to interview somebody just for fun. Here are all of the questions to ask them. Here's how to set up your camera. For so many people lose somebody that they love, and they afterwards have photos, maybe a few videos, but they don't really have them talking about their life.
Yeah,
like
the substance.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so right now I've got a camera on me. It's capturing my voice, the nuances of my personality, how I overuse my hands to express everything that I've got to say. Video really is, and I'm a lifetime health journalist, so I've used all of these mediums throughout my career, and I can safely say if you can point a camera at someone, you don't need any fancy equipment, but just ask them the questions that I put in the book about their life. That will become a keepsake that you will treasure forever.
Yeah.
Because we don't ask them, what's the hardest thing that you ever went through at work? How did you overcome it? Who was the love of your life? How did you meet them? What was the greatest day? What was the worst day? What was your first car? Like things that, all of that stuff gets lost.
Do you give them the questions before? Go, I'll be asking you these, or do you just go for the spontaneous?
I like it to be spontaneous.
Yeah.
I would ask them.
Yeah,
Do you want to be prepared? But I don't want you to overthink it, or do you just want me to fire stuff at you? And then, use your common sense. If there's a question in there that you think is going to upset them because they had a terrible upbringing or whatever, you just don't ask that question.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so you had a death doula. Was that within the month out? How long before, the end? And what was were they there daily? Was it a meet once a week with you? And I just don't know what they do.
She actually came into play very early, and then we didn't really see her for quite a while, and then slowly she started kind of coming in more and more, and then towards the end she was as critical a part of the care team as I was, very much kind of doing the care for Dad. After we had the 2 weeks in hospice and came home for 2 weeks before he passed, there was no way his care needs had changed. There was no way that I could continue say he needed somebody with him 24/7. I have 2 small children.
Yeah.
There was just no way.
Hospice for a couple of weeks and effectively go home for end of life.
To die.
Why not just stay at home? Or is that just the nature of the care and the changing nature?
We could not get his symptoms under control at home. He was just too symptomatic. It wasn't comfortable for him. If he had have died like that, it would not have been a comfortable death. He needed 24/7 oversight. He needed nurses at the press of a button. We needed to rejig his medications. The safest place to do that is with clinical oversight. He just wasn't stable.
Yeah.
So we got him stable and then he came home.
Do you know, I guess for the engagement of the doula, obviously I don't think any government would pay for it, but that's an investment that...
Yeah, it's private investment.
Yeah. Are we talking $10,000 over the time or...
I don't know.
And I don't like putting prices on it because it's going to be state by state based and they're private people, but...
Yes, that's right.
Was it worth it is my question.
120,000 million %.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, she's my favourite person on the planet. I adore her. She brought so much value. And for anybody sitting here listening going, I have no idea what they're talking about, what is a doula? Death doulas are designed to give essentially 2 streams of support. One is administrative. So death is a process, right? There is a process that the body goes through, but there is also a process that we have to go through in order to shepherd somebody from this world to whatever comes next. There are forms that need to be done in a particular order. Now, if somebody dies in a hospital, a lot of that will be undertaken by the hospital social worker. There will be layers of support there. But if somebody dies at home, which was what my dad wanted and the vast majority of people say that they want, that support isn't necessarily there. And so this is as close as you'll get to a magical death administration fairy, in essence. So administrative support and spiritual guidance. So she was supposed to help Dad envision what might make for a good death, what might he like. And I think perhaps because of fear, perhaps because of a little bit of denial, he really wasn't willing to go there with her on that. But the way that their relationship came together towards the end and she was really able to care for him was really beautiful.
And was voluntary assisted dying on the menu for your dad at all?
It was. We had it in place. And I remember the pharmacy team coming over. They bring over to your house. Well, just to take a step back, you can do self-administered or practitioner administered. And if you choose self-administered, the pharmacy team brings 2 kits to your house. One is the dummy kit. The pretend kit looks exactly the same as the real deal, and the other kit is the real deal. And the pharmacy team go through the whole process with you and make the person who's doing the dying mix and then drink the liquid to ensure that their swallow reflex is still in place and that they are still capable of doing that. And if they are, then they leave the real kit with you.
Yeah.
So we went through that whole process, and then towards the end of his life, as happens with lots of people, Dad started to lose his swallow reflex. So when he would have a sip of water, he would choke. And I remember saying to him, it was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had to have with anyone, probably will be forever, was I am nervous that your choice is going to be taken away. So if you cough when you sip water, that's one thing. But if you cough when you're sipping the liquid that's designed to end your life and you only take in 1/10 of it or 1/8 of it or 1/4 of it or 1/2 of it, well, we don't know what that might do. That makes me really nervous for you. I don't want your choice to be taken away here. So we ended up switching to practitioner administered, which means that a practitioner will come to wherever you are and inject you with the medication so that which will end your life. And the universe took it into its own hands and he didn't end up using it, which happens for a lot of people. But I do know that it gave him some comfort to know that on any given Tuesday, if
the
he
option was there.
Really done, he had the option to bow out.
Well, Casey Beros, thank you so much for dropping in and sharing Next of Kin with us. And as I said, everyone, great Christmas present. I'll be reading this on the plane on the way home. because I couldn't get it in time for our recording. But thank you so much for joining us on Retire Right. We'll put a link in the show note and the description to your website and a link to the book. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And can I just say lastly that anybody listening to this, it's tough. It's really difficult. It can feel really awful in some moments, and it is so beautiful and connecting, and time with this person that you will never ever get back. So no more heads in the sand. It is time to acknowledge and to learn about what might happen and prepare ourselves a little bit more. Thank you for having me.
Love it. Thank you. Bye.
Any advice is general financial advice only, which does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. Because of that, you should consider if the advice is appropriate to you and your needs before acting on the information. If you do choose to buy a financial product, read the Product Disclosure Statement, PDS, and Target Market Determination, TMD, and obtain appropriate financial advice tailored to your needs. Simo Interactive, Pty Ltd, and Glen James are authorised representatives of Money Sherpa Pty Ltd, which holds Financial Services Licence 451289. Martin McGrath, Financial Edge Group, and its employed financial advisors are authorised representatives of Synchron Advice, AFSL 243313. Opinions or comments from any guest on the podcast are theirs, and not those of the hosts, the publisher, or their respective licence holders.